Look at this caption right here. The UN's top court is calling for the ethnic cleansing of Jews from the Jewish homeland. World's least genocidal Zionist, try not to project the crimes that you are committing onto your victims and blame them. Challenge impossible.
Has given an advisory opinion that Israel must evacuate the territories it conquered from Egypt and Jordan back in 1967.
Yes, you admit it. So wait, you just admitted that you conquered those lands illegally in a war of aggression. How do you square this circle? How do you justify that? You just admitted that you conquered those lands.
Including, wait for it, the old city of Jerusalem. Now this is
Yes, the old city of Jerusalem. In Palestine. Every accusation.
the same UN court chaired by Lebanese diplomat Nawaf Salam, despite his massive and obvious conflict of interest. Salam wants you to think it's a violation of international law for Jews to live in the Jewish quarter of the old city of Jerusalem, that Israel must ethnically cleanse them and hand over the Western Wall to a fictitious Palestinian state.
Fictitious Palestinian state. Wow, the lies that are just coming out of this guy's gross goatee-laden mouth is abominable. Can we run that back?
By Lebanese diplomat Nawaf Salam, despite his massive and obvious conflict of interest. Salam wants you to think it's a violation of international law for Jews to live in the Jewish quarter of the old city of Jerusalem.
Yeah, no, it's a Lebanese official, Salam, who says this, right? He wants you to believe that it's a violation of international law, not the actual institutions that administer international law, which have all agreed that the occupation of East Jerusalem is a violation of international law. No, it's just some rogue Lebanese official. Is that really what he just tried to get us to think? The non-stop gaslighting, exactly. Not an occupation, it's just vibes. Crazy.
That Israel must ethnically cleanse them and hand over the Western Wall.
Israel must ethnically cleanse its own people and hand over the Western Wall. Yeah, the wall that you constructed, which the ICJ advisory ruling administered in 2004 concluded was a war crime. The construction of the apartheid wall around the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, amounted to a war crime because it normalized what were illegal settlements, once again robbing Palestinians of more of their own land. Yeah, that Western Wall. But I love how he says Israel's just got to ethnically cleanse its own people from the occupied territories. We got to move our people out of there. We got to ethnically cleanse our people from our Jewish homeland.
To a fictitious Palestinian state.
A fictitious Palestinian state, which again, the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, plethora of human rights organizations, humanitarian organizations, thousands of international legal experts, even Israel's own human rights organization, B'Tselem, have all concluded against Israel. What were we talking about? Yeah, the fictitious Palestinian state, right? I get lost, like thinking of all of the international institutions that have validated, have concluded that Palestine is a sovereign territory, is not a fictitious state. But just the complete denial of a people as he tries to masquerade as the victim, okay? He's trying to masquerade as if, his state, his people are being victimized and denied their right to self-determine as he denies the rights of the Palestinians in his rhetoric here. So this is what you need to do when you're in the Israeli citizen spokesperson's office. This is what you got to do.
Rather, coming 80 years after the Holocaust.
Israel's like a thief who robbed your clothes with your initials on it under the pretense of finders keepers. It's pretty good. That's a pretty good analogy for what's happening. Yeah, Darvo, another, deny, accuse, reverse victim, and occupation is what the O stands for.
The UN's top court is calling for ethnic cleansing of Jews from the Jewish homeland.
Who said that it was the Jewish homeland? I'm still just befuddled on that detail. Says who?
Immoral opinion, frankly absurd, but not really surprised. The same UN's Human Rights Council spends most of its time bashing the Jewish state while being chaired by the world's worst human rights violators. And the same UN continues to launder money for Hamas through UNRWA while indoctrinating Palestinian children to reject peace and turning a blind eye to Hamas terrorists as they fight out of UN schools.
Holy shit. Was that just one lie after another? Was that one projection after another? Run that back.
The same UN's Human Rights Council spends most of its time bashing the Jewish state while being chaired by the world's worst human rights violators.
Yeah, they bash us for being the world's worst human rights violators. Or is he saying that they're being chaired by the world's worst?
And the same UN continues to launder money for Hamas through
They launder money for Hamas through UNRWA. That's so wild that that's what you're gonna say. They're laundering money for Hamas. I'm just speechless, because like, where do you even begin? Where do you even begin? I mean, this is just like, it's almost like so laughable and ridiculous that you could just say cope. Cope. You're coping really hard right now, I see that you're in your feelings. You are coping massively. No one believes your bullshit. Nobody believes you're the victim, and we understand. We understand that you're going through it right now, and you're projecting. But literally no one else sees what you're seeing, okay? You live in a vastly different world. You live above the world. You're from the moon.
While indoctrinating Palestinian children to reject peace and turning a blind eye to Hamas terrorists.
Indoctrinating Palestinian children to reject peace. Don't the little Zionist children, the little Yisrael chais, don't they all go to hate camp or some shit? For their upbringing? They're just, as we see, IDF soldiers so gleefully recounting their massacres of children, and every time they get interviewed, it's like, we want them all to die. And it's like, well, certainly you don't mean not the innocent, civilian, you don't mean, no, everyone. It's like, okay, Israel, please just try not to act like a genocidal psychopath, just for once. We understand you have some, but just say no, everyone. It's like, okay, cool. So you have to go bye-bye.
As they fight out of UN schools. But let's understand a little bit more how the ICJ works. Because, despite the name, the ICJ doesn't actually operate anything close to an actual court. The ICJ's ruling is only advisory, not legally binding.
Hey guys, what a cope, right? It's just advisory, guys. It's non-binding. It's just a little advice. The highest court on earth has just suggested. They've advised that this is probably what should happen, but that's our saving grace. It's just an advisory ruling, just like how all the UN resolutions are non-binding. So what's the big deal? We don't have to follow this shit.
And the court doesn't use some of the most basic legal practices, including rules of evidence, instead of verifying.
The Israeli state is accusing the International Court of Justice for not showing evidence for its claims. I mean, what world do we... I mean, really?
Facts.
Yeah.
Basing itself on talking points from partisan anti-Israel organizations.
Oh, yes, they're partisan anti-Israel organizations. It's a cult. That's right. I mean, you think Scientology was weird.
Court members aren't selected based on legal experience, but by the same political voting as the rest of the UN. And that's why Nawaf Salam can be the court's president, even though as Lebanon's ambassador to the UN, he many times attacked Israel in partisan, vitriolic ways.
So he's once again trying to single out the UN is compromised, is what he's saying, because the Lebanese minister, Salam, is the president of, I'm sorry, what was it? What is he the president of in the UN? Would that be the International Court of Justice? Obviously, the International Court of Justice is an international, entity. Salam, let's see. So he's one of the judges, elected president. Judge Nawaf Salam, elected president of the International Court of Justice. Well, he was elected. He was elected by the international community as being the president. Why is that some controversial? I mean, unfortunately, it's such a non-point, It's not even the only court that has condemned Israel.
Has his eye on higher office back in Lebanon. Something that must influence his ruling.
It must. I'm in my feelings. I'm going by vibes alone, but we know that the International Court of Justice just elected a Lebanese president, and we don't like Lebanon, so clearly we're not guilty of war crimes, and this is a farce. This whole kangaroo court was a sham. So there must be some complicity here, some conspiracy. This must be some anti-Israel conspiracy. Okay, well, cool. So do you want to show us some evidence for this? Is there any evidence to support? Well, no, there just must be. Clearly, there must be. Well, how do you explain? Okay, let's just take away. Maybe you're right. The International Court of Justice. Okay, fine. Well, what about the International Criminal Court? Well, that's a rogue prosecutor. Clearly, he was a rogue prosecutor, anti-Israel prosecutor. Okay, so the International Criminal Court has a rogue prosecutor. The International Court of Justice, on the other hand, has a Lebanese president, so that's a conspiracy if I've ever heard one. Well, what about South Africa bringing the case of genocide to the International Court? Well, they're also pro-Hamas. The South Africans are basically Hamas, so obviously that's also ridiculous. And what else? We can go on and on and on. Well, what about the UN? The UN itself, the United Nations Security Council 242 resolution, which we love to go back to 1967. What about those conquered territories? You just mentioned conquered territories. What about the territories you conquered, which have been in violation of international law since 1967, according to the United Nations? United Nations, that's a anti-Israel, pro-Hamas. United Nations launders, the United Nations launders money to Hamas through its humanitarian aid organization, UNRWA. Oh, that's right, UNRWA, the only organization that actually cares about Palestinians while they're being illegally occupied and ethnically cleansed and starved and bombed. The only organization that is looking out for the Palestinians and making sure that somehow they're getting some aid in there. That organization is laundering money to Hamas. Why does Hamas need to launder money? Why do they need to be so subversive? Why do they dig tunnels underground in order to have an economy? Why has it gotten so bad that Harvard economists are writing books about how Gaza's economy is now a tunnel economy, that they smuggle in 90% of all construction materials, 60% of all clothing, 99% of Gaza's economy is smuggled in through tunnels? Why is that? Why is Hamas being reduced to a tunnel network? Why is Hamas being, reduced to, as you accuse them of, which I've seen no evidence of, laundering money? Why do they need to get their money that way? From a humanitarian organization? Why is it that you accuse Hamas of laundering money through UNRWA, and yet what about the United States sending you money through the military-industrial complex, through emergency clauses from the Pentagon, bypassing Congress, bypassing congressional approval? Why is that not considered laundering money to the Israeli state? Well, if Hamas is laundering money, or if the UN is laundering money to Hamas, then what is the United States doing, giving $3 billion and bypassing congressional approval to Israel every year? And more, actually. But the point I'm making is, why do they need to go underground? Why is it illegal for a government? This is a Hamas we're talking about. They are the administering government of the Gaza Strip. Why do you care so much how Hamas is getting money? That's not your business. It's not your territory. You have no control over that. You have unilateral control over it, and that's the point. But last I heard, it's not illegal for a government to interface with the international community as it sees fit. Why do you have a problem with this? Why have they been deprived of funding? Why have they been deprived of their resources? Why have they been deprived of their land? Why have they been deprived of materials? Why have they been deprived of an economy so much that they would necessarily be dependent on foreign handouts from humanitarian organizations acting out of a moral impulse for goodwill? I love when they say, Hamas squanders the aid that was given to them. Yeah, why are they dependent on aid? Why is a national territory, why is a country with its full autonomous rights to self-determine dependent on foreign handouts to have an economy? I'll shut up.
Salam would have to recuse himself. The whole trial would be thrown out as a mistrial, because you cannot.
This is a Zionist wet dream, right? It's a nice dream from Zioland. Yeah, the whole thing gets thrown out. We're not guilty of anything.
Barely judge a defendant if you've spent your whole career attempting to prosecute them. It's absurd to call Jews in Israel settler colonialists.
Why?
Don't just take our word for it. That's what the ICJ's Vice President, Julia Sebutinde, actually said. Sebutinde, the first African...
When? Where? What are you talking about? Show us evidence of this. What was the circumstance? Because all I've ever heard from the ICJ are the actual rulings, not quotes from one of its members, but actual legitimate formalized rulings from the ICJ. I've heard resolution after resolution condemning the Zionist project of Israel. What are you talking about? This is such paltry information to defend your claim that you have a right to that land.
Woman to sit on the ICJ, ripped into her colleague's opinion, tearing it to shreds, and calling for ongoing efforts to resolve the conflict through the negotiation framework. instead of simply trying to ignore the history and context, as so many of her colleagues seemed
This
so
is
eager to do.
crazy because the Palestinians have been trying to peacefully negotiate with the Zionists for over 100 years now. You know, remember, ever since the Palestinians caught wind of the Balfour Declaration and the intentions of the British Empire to institute a Jewish homeland in the land of Palestine, the Palestinian Arabs have been delegating, forming committees to interface with the British Empire. And just as you hear from this chode today, they have been denied a state. They have been denied an existence. They have not been recognized. They are fictitious. They have no sovereignty. In fact, in order for the British Empire to even listen to these committees formed by the Palestinian Arabs, which numbered, I think, 7 over the decades in the interwar period between 1917 and 1948, the only precondition was that the Palestinians would have to accept the language of the Balfour Declaration and the British Mandate in order for the British to even hear them. So think about that. And that's something that Rashid Khalidi I always bring up. That's in his book, 100 Years of War on Palestine, is just the systematic denial of the Palestinian people. And it's expressed in the language of the British Mandate and the Balfour Declaration. And it was the precondition for the British government to even hear the Palestinians advocating on their behalf. They had to deny themselves first. Deny yourself first, then we'll talk to you. Deny that you have any rights, then we'll hear you out about how you wish to have rights.
Her dissent highlighted simple facts. Number one, the Jewish people have been in Jerusalem for 3,000 years.
Again,
Jerusalem.
biblical times, right? There's no evidence necessary to support this claim, right? We were there 3,000 years ago, all right? Yep, we were there 3,000 years ago. And when the Jewish temple fell, King David, you know, all that. Yeah, that was us. So this is fine. Well, no, that's actually not how history went. And also, I mean, think about how psychopathic it is to invoke the Bible as a historical record, as historical evidence to prove that you are perfectly legal within your rights to commit an ethnic cleansing. So yes, 3,000 years ago, the Temple of David fell and my people were exiled from the land. And so now it's 2024. We're supposed to be there. And as I always say, Yisrael chodes love to go back to 3,000 years ago to fucking BCE in BFE, but can't go back to 1947. I'm gonna have a stroke.
Whose name is in the Hebrew language, has since then been a focal point of Jewish life, culture, and religious belief. And I quote, "Their bond to the land has persisted despite the adversities, persecution, and diaspora of the Jewish people have faced over
The
millennia."
diaspora of the Jewish
September
people.
2nd.
Yeah, there's no diaspora of the Palestinian people since 1948, right? It's the diaspora of the Jewish people. We must invoke ancient times. That's why, like, what did the Palestinians have to do with this?
Arab-Israeli conflict is not actually about land. Has it become
What? That's exactly what it's about. It's literally land over people. That is the Israeli policy. It's a settler colonial project. You cannot have settler colonialism without land. It's the most pivotal thing. Why are you denying what you love to do, which is take land from people? What is it about? I really want to know. What is it about if it's not about land? It's about justice. It's about democracy. It's about human rights. It's about freedom. Let me see. What high-minded platitude is this Israeli chode about to invoke?
clear since the October 7th massacre? The conflict has always been about, and I quote, "the denial of Israel's existence and legitimacy as an independent, non-Arab state."
The denial of Israel's existence has always been what this is about. Israel didn't exist until 1948 and has been systematically denying the Palestinians of an existence. But once again, our world's least genocidal Zionist will try not to project the crimes of the Israeli state onto the victims of the Israeli state. But it is always, and I mean always, a challenge impossible.
In a region perceived as belonging exclusively to the Arabs.
Nobody said exclusively to the Arabs. Before the settler colonial project was started, Jewish settlers and Arab settlers lived largely in peace, okay? There certainly wasn't a Nakba, there wasn't, massacres. There was no Dair Yassin before Israel, before the Zionist project, because Dair Yassin was actually months before Israel was formalized, if I remember correctly.
People against Hezbollah's 6,000 rockets, missiles, and drones launched out of Lebanon. It strikes back against the Houthis in Yemen, and Israel continues to stand against Iran's proxy armies and all those who try to murder the Jewish people.
Try to murder the Jewish people, right? Why are the Houthis and why is Hezbollah striking Israel? What was their public announcement? Why are they striking Israel? Both the Houthis and Hezbollah are doing what any responsible country should be doing, and that is blockading and hindering a country's ability to commit a genocide. Their stated reason for bombing commercial ships in the Houthis' case and for bombing territory in North Israel in Hezbollah's case is in protestation of the genocide in the Gaza Strip. Is protestation a word? I don't know. In protest of the genocide in Gaza Strip. He's never going to tell you that. What are they trying to do? According to this chode, they're just trying to murder Jewish people. Once again, it's Jewish people. It's not Israelis, but just Jewish people. They just hate Jewish people. Like I said, there's nothing more anti-Semitic than the Zionist state of Israel. Look what it's doing in the name of the Jewish faith. The number one reason for the rise in anti-Semitism in the world today is Israel.
Israel continues to stand against those like the UN who seek to ignore the need for negotiations on the ground and seek simply to expel the Jewish people from territory by decree. Israel believes in justice.
Yes, Israel believes in justice. I almost threw up all over your face.
Kangaroo court, and believe me, I'm an Australian. I know what a kangaroo court looks like.
He's fucking Australian, guys. Oh my god. How much of a self-report is this? He's not even an Israeli. Whatever that means. I mean, nobody's an Israeli. It's a made-up thing. But he's Australian. He's literally part of the Anglosphere. Why? How do people not see that this is white supremacy in the Middle East? This is a white supremacist settler colonial project in the Middle East. Utterly absurd. This guy just said he's Australian. He knows a thing or two about kangaroo courts. Oh my god. I want to punch you in the face.
So, now, let's take some questions from our audience watching live.
Our first question comes from YouTube Live. Why did Israel announce that people need to leave?
Yeah, it wasn't enough for the Australian genocide of the indigenous people there. He had to go to Israel.
Part of a sad reality that exists in the current state at play in the Gaza Strip right now. Israel is attempting to set up designated humanitarian zones.
He's so awful at lying, he can't even get the words out. Listen to him.
Which are intended to be places for civilians to seek safety and security, not as places for Hamas or Islamic Jihad operatives to operate out of as they continue to fire rockets, continue to move hostages, continue to attack Israel out of the Strip.
Everything he said was just a lie, okay? Again, one, no evidence. No evidence for Hamas using civilian infrastructure. Number two, Israel has systematically denied them the right to organize a military, to have military bases, to have military infrastructure. You think they want to fight from the underground, bitch? No. Like, pull your head out of your arse, you fucking Australian kangaroo court having motherfucker. I don't know. I could do better. But the third point, even if it were the truth that Hamas uses hospitals, schools, etc., humanitarian buildings to conduct their, what you call terrorism, that doesn't give you the right to bomb the hospital, okay? Can't just use indiscriminate violence against civilian infrastructure. I'm losing my mind.
And unfortunately, that is the reality that is being faced on the ground.
Listen to this whole sentence, okay? We gotta run this back. It's too good. He gets this question. He has to this is the first time this guy's got to go off script, okay? He gets a live question. We got a live one. Listen to how he's still trying to maintain that decorum, that delivery, right? Very official. He's still trying to be official, but he's not rehearsed on this answer. He's got to pull it out of his ass real quick. So what does he do? He stumbles with his words. He doesn't quite know how to continue. He's not as rehearsed.
Why did Israel announce that people need to leave part of the humanitarian zone in Gaza?
This is part of a sad reality that exists in the current state at play in the Gaza Strip right now. Israel.
He's like having to answer for some of the most marginally incriminating questions. His whole answer is Hamas. This is the sad reality of Hamas. Okay? Remember Hamas. Hashtag never forget Hamas.
is attempting to set up designated humanitarian zones, which are intended to be places for civilians to seek safety and security, not as places for Hamas or Islamic Jihad operatives to operate out of as they continue to fire rockets, continue to move hostages, continue to attack Israel out of the Strip. And unfortunately, that is the reality that is being faced on the ground.
On the ground. Another shrimp on the barbie. I'm Yisrael Chai.
Humanitarian zones set up. Hamas operatives and their ilk like to pop up in these same areas, continue to perform attacks, to move
They pop up out of their pouches because they're kangaroos. I'm from Australia. Israel Chai.
and to ignore the supposed nature of a humanitarian zone. And thus, Israel has to manage...
Thus, Israel must murder children by the tens of thousands. There is no other way. I'm Yisrael Chai. I have a right to that land. Sky Daddy said so. The Miracle Book told me.
Reality on the ground from a strategic military standpoint. As Israel attempts to dismantle Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and any other terrorist operations that are occurring inside the Gaza Strip, they must work with that reality. And unfortunately, that sometimes means informing Gazan civilians that they need to...
Unfortunately, that means sometimes we must murder children.
...get out of the way so that Israel can operate...
Get out of the way and have another shrimp on the barbie. I'm from Australia. I'm Yisrael Chai. They have to get out of the way. You follow them. What are you talking about? You follow them wherever they go, and then you bomb the places that you told them that were safe.
...cleanly to remove these operatives. And if they would simply not operate from amongst these civilian areas where humanitarian zones are supposed to be and where people are supposed to be able to stand safely removed from conflict zones, then it would be a much clearer and cleaner process for Gazans to continue to reside in certain areas. But as it stands, the reality right now, Hamas seems more than willing to continue to operate. As we said, UNRWA schools...
No, Israel seems more than willing to continue its genocide.
Hospitals, clinics, mosques, wherever they need to fulfill their goals and aims to continue attacking, continue fighting, and continue holding hostages against Israel and any sort of attempts to shut them down.
That was an awful answer, and you're terrible. All I heard was, we must continue bombing hospitals, mosques, and schools. There's just no other way. We're dealing with rats. Yes, cheerio, as it were. I'm Yisrael Chai. I must speak the language of my people. Cheerio, have another shrimp on the barbie. I need some more Australian catchphrases. You know what I mean? Who do I think I am?
Nixon ordered Cambodian genocide. Clinton sent cruise missiles to Sudan, people died. Obama gave the orders to do drones